Dan Swenson Klatt was a classroom teacher for 20 years, inspiring 13 and 14-year-olds to love to read. Then he left the classroom to follow a dream that he and his siblings had since childhood, to open a neighborhood coffee shop. He did that and then moved it to Nicollet Square to partner with Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative to mentor the youth coming out of homelessness who lived above him. Butter Bakery and Cafe is also a community builder. It's a gathering place and a resource for the Kingfield and Lyndale neighborhoods. It's also an advocacy center. Dan himself has been a tireless campaigner for an equitable living wage. He and Butter have also joined a national movement of restaurants to offer a refuge from hate, Sanctuary Restaurant, a place at the table for everyone. Recently, Butter reformed as a general benefit corporation to honor the mission-oriented focus of the business. And they've entered a partnership with Wildflower Coffee, who shares their mission of mentoring homeless youth. Dan, I'm going to turn the mic over to you to fill us in on some of these developments. Welcome to Sunday Forum, and thank you so very, very much for being with us.
Thank you, Jackie. It is good to be here. And I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be with you, even if virtually. I'm joining you from the North Woods today. And I do want to acknowledge that I'm telling this story from the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe and Dakota people, who we have worked to honor, and we strive to recognize their efforts to be good stewards and to do our work to be good stewards. I also share this story knowing that I come from some privilege and from a space as a white male where my benefits and ability to have some success have been connected to who I am. And so I recognize that and take responsibility for being a better person to share what I have benefited from. I also come from a deep faith and have been at Our Savior's Lutheran in South Minneapolis for many years, working to live out that faith. And as a person of faith, I believe that love indeed is stronger than hate, and that transformation is possible and happens all the time. That led me to where I am as a business owner. And I want to share with you today some stories about what it has meant to be creating a neighborhood business, to live in a mission-oriented business, and to find a way to grow that business in ways that have benefited our community. So I'm going to share some slides from Butter. Some of you may know Butter. Some of you may have been connected to Plymouth and its work to build Nicollet Square. And for that, I am very grateful. And for those of you who don't, I hope this will be a way to get to know us and find ways to be connected. So I have indeed a way to share a bit about the ingredients for a sustainable cafe, which was our goal at the beginning. My earliest memories are around a kitchen. My mother there in the center made me feel comfortable in a kitchen. And I have memories of cinnamon bread, of spaghetti sauce, of waffles. But it was always Mom welcoming me, helping me feel like I could be a cook. And indeed, one of my first jobs was as a cook in high school. I always feel like I've come back to that. But before that, I did indeed spend 20 years of teaching. And I think those formed a lot of what Butter is about. I was a middle school teacher. For those of you who have jumped onto the little new Pixar film Soul. I had a lot of moments there where I was recognizing what it's like to be a middle school teacher. It does require some play, some ability to be connected to kids. Most of my time indeed was spent with getting kids out into the woods, out into the environment, making connections with the world, the earth. But after 20 years, I got a little tired, and I really felt like it was time to pass that along to a younger crew of teachers. The conversations began around creating a little coffee shop and a little restaurant, perhaps. And I always start with a pretty simple menu. For me, food is about sharing with my family. It's about the simple things that create routines. And indeed, routines for me have led to lots of creativity. But I grew up with a very simple palate, indeed. I also grew up with a garden. And that garden piece had a grounding experience for me as well. I didn't know that I would like peas until I actually grew my own. Picking berries for me became a kind of lifelong adventure. I learned to compost as a child. I knew that growing things connected me to earth in ways that was both an ability to see God's creation at work and to enjoy the mystery around seed and growth. In college, I had the opportunity to actually get onto a farm and spent a couple summers working with crops. And those pieces taught me more about a lifestyle of stewardship of the earth, of understanding that that is actually a lifestyle and a place in which we really benefit from the ability of people to work really hard to feed us. I have been a host of CSAs for almost the entire time I've been in business as a way to help bridge that connection between farm and neighbors. But it has also given me a real respect, and I really have loved having those connections to farmers, and they make a difference for who we are. But probably the main part that has given me a way to build a business has been through being a storyteller. I was a storyteller as a teacher, and indeed began my kind of story writing as a high schooler. Offered opportunities to write for a newspaper, which I have continued to do throughout my life. And I use those storytelling methods and writing methods to be a writing teacher, to help kids see the small things, to help them be alert to their earth, to help them to listen to each other. And whether that be in verse or song, or just the stories that we tell of our lives, those become the ways to create a sustainable space, because it has really indeed connected me with people, present, past, and future. I have a short, brief story about Gladys here in her lovely fuchsia coat. Gladys was a member of my congregation. And when I opened my shop, she was already nearly 90. And so coming to my shop was not an easy thing to do, but she made it possible. Got herself there with the help of a friend who drove her for lunch, often several times a week. Gladys came for the food, but really she came to tell stories. She had so many stories she wanted to share with us. And it did mean that every time she showed up for lunch, I needed to sit down and just take a few minutes to hear a story. Those became real important ways for me to pattern the way I worked as an owner, to find ways to sit down with people at the shop and just listen, to hear the stories. My family has been a part of this forever, and and indeed they are the way that I recognize that what I bring to the shop is built from the people who have taught me and loved me through my life. It has meant that those connections are helping me recognize that I am also leading this forward into something into the future. I'm thinking about those who are ahead of me, the generations to come, and knowing that those people will look at what we've done and say, thank you, I hope. I do hope. And so as I got to the end of my teaching career, what I really wanted to do was find a place to walk to. I had been teaching in the suburbs of Minneapolis for many years. I had not known my neighborhood that I lived in because I was always driving out of it. And my desire was to be a walking space. And finding a walking space has created what I think of as a sustainable business for me. I am so close to home. I have also found ways to think of that for my staff, for my suppliers, find ways that we stay close to each other and recognize that our neighbors can be connected to us that way. These are the pictures of the original Butter on 36th and Grand. It was a small starter spot for me that helped me to get started, but it was what was available in my neighborhood, and I just jumped in. Having always loved baking, I was delighted by my mother-in-law shortly upon becoming a member of that family to receive a small book about scones, which I had not made before. She taught me that baking for family is indeed a real gift. And baking scones for me became a gift for how to teach as well. I often taught my students how to bake scones as a way to have a little different kind of learning experience as well. The scones found their way into that coffee shop right away. And I have been really blessed to have talented bakers throughout the years who have shared both a passion for working with a small batch, baking from scratch, and indeed enjoying the recipe that I have loved for my scones. After a few years, we really did find ourselves outgrowing a small space. And for me, growth has always felt like necessary as a part of life, but wanting to do it organically, wanting to do it naturally, wanting to find ways when it was the right time and being ready to grow. We really were blessed by having the building of Nicollet Square time out with the need for a larger space for my business. I remember the first visit from into that empty space and the visions from Beacon Interfaith Housing for what Nicollet Square could hold were indeed the visions that I had. We found ourselves in the same space, talking about the same desires to share a training space, a mentoring space, an educational space. And I have found it to be the right next space for Butter. And so we moved in October of 2012. At nearly 9 years in, we are really kind of finding a way to live in it now. It indeed kind of filled one missing spot within the business. I always was interested in things like composting and local sourcing and trying to create a healthy workspace. But moving into Nicollet Square provided a real purpose, a mission. And we have been living into that over the years that we've been there. It has meant a little transformation for the shop. It has meant that we've had to think of ourselves differently, to learn some new skills. My teaching background has been useful, but I've also had to learn some new pieces about how to be a work site space. Those have built me into a place that has been able to train others as well and indeed been available for collaborating with others with a similar mission, whether that be a school or another little business. And so in this new space, we've been able to think of ourselves as being growth agents as well. I don't think of sustainability as a place where you just sit still and hold on. It is indeed about growth. And I think my sense of what change is about means that we have to be willing to embrace that change. And for me, that sometimes has meant it takes a long time to get ready to actually change. Things like moving into composting was easy for us as a business, but it took many, many years for the city to get to that point. Thinking about going into a better kind of pay frame for my staff, way to pay my staff, compensate my staff. It took a little while to reach that point of saying, I'm ready to change. We can make that change. And yet when we did it, we felt like it was the right thing to do. We have also kind of built ourselves around seeing a sense of what it means to see potential and know that that ability to change is important. And so the last part that I think I've really recognized about sustainability is that it's not an individual effort. It is indeed a community effort. And that community has been our investment, a way to say what we do for our community will come back to us. We know that. And that construction of a space has been both kind of internal and external. We really have been blessed by having neighbors and a community, a city that has been willing to support us in what we do, to see the model that we have or the kind of the new things we're trying are things that can be supported as well. And in a year like this, that has not gone so well for many businesses, including ours. We have been carried through by a community, and we wouldn't have had that. And I know that there are businesses that weren't ready for this, just missed that investment in their community and weren't ready to have a community kind of step up for them. And so I think I'll kind of end with a sense of just recognizing that there's always time to try something new. The only wonder that I have now is in the wonder of life, not in bread. But I do try to keep a sense of wonder and think about what's next. I had never eaten a vegetarian burger before, but we tried one out and kept one here. I had never made art out of steamed milk before I had this business, but it's possible, and it was fun to try that, learn something new. And indeed, for those of you who've had the eclairs, potash shoes, a real challenge and a fun thing to learn. And I, as a baker, found it to be a real delight to get to know how to do it and feel like there's a real joy in learning it. And it has given me a chance to continue to be a learner. And for myself, that's a real gift. And with that, I want to just say, it's been a real joy to be in this space, and I really, I'm excited to be working on what will be next. And there's a lot that's next. Some of the kind of things that have been shared so far, as an internship space, a work site, we've been working with Nicollet Square, who works with YouthLink as their program directors. And now we've had the opportunity to work with Wildflyer, who shares our mission in providing training for young adults who are homeless or have experienced homelessness. Over the course of the years since 2012, we've had 53 interns with us during that time. 11 of them have stayed, have been hired for blocks of time. One of them as long as over 3 years, which is a real gift to us to have them as a part of our space. We currently have 2 of the interns who have been hired on and are part of our staff and are working with us. We found that that program for us is something that is a challenge. It's a challenge to be a workspace and a training space. And so having a partner in that with the Wildflyer folks has been real important to us to share their skills, their experiences, their staff as well, just to have staff time. There was a change in the process to how Nicollet Square was able to screen the residents for the building, which changed a lot of how we were able to work with young adults. Many of the young adults who are there now have much deeper needs and other issues to work on that has made it more difficult for us to be an internship site, has asked us to kind of find a stronger program to provide. And that's going to be one of our goals over the years, is to be able to be available for kids who have even deeper needs. We moved our whole business model into a kind of a very different model as a social benefit corporation a couple years back, and have been learning what that means to be a mission-oriented business. And to see ourselves as a training space for other businesses who can be in that space too, who can see themselves as more than just profit, recognize that social benefits are indeed a beautiful space for any business at all. And as Jackie mentioned, being an advocate for workspaces and workers has given me a little different voice as well. I think that's my teacher voice in a lot of ways, knowing that the students in my classroom were my customers. I often think of the customers in my shop as not just the customers, but my staff. My staff are my customers as well. They're with me as members of a team, but they're there for something as well. They're there to be served as well. And I have been their advocate, have been their mentor in lots of ways too. And I think we really have tried to figure out a way to kind of use that community reputation as a space, the experiences we've had over the many years, to be a good voice. We've been asked by many organizations to be that business voice because it's not the voice you often hear. Sometimes being a little different prophetic voice in the wilderness really matters. And that for me has meant I've been willing to step out in ways that kind of surprise people at times, surprise folks about what a restaurant should be like. We did indeed decide to not go to dining in throughout the entire time because I had concerns about my staff's health. We have several staff who have health concerns, and for them to be able to work in the space that we have, it was important for me to create a safe space for them during the pandemic. And that has meant we just can't have as much customer contact. It makes it a safer space for my employees. And that's an important part of what I won't be open if I don't have employees. So we start there. I wanted to just share that as we look to the future as a cafe, being a mission-oriented space has meant being willing to recognize more places to collaborate. This year especially, those have been meant that we've been reaching out into churches to help with feeding, being a community food space. That meant we were providing meals at the parks, offering ways to support the folks who really found themselves unhoused and without food security. I see that as an important part of where we go from here too, to recognize that we have a resource as a community space, as a restaurant, a kitchen, that we need to put to use in more ways. It meant that I had an opportunity to provide that kitchen as a space for another business who had lost its catering events, who had lost its ability to have a space to work out of. And so just opening it up to be available was important to us as a mission space. And I can see that being important for the future for us as well. Knowing that capacity means being open, being available. So we're looking at ways to include that too. At that point, I want to just kind of allow Jackie to send questions my way. I'd be happy to share more in conversation around kind of where we're going as a shop. And I certainly have really appreciated your work, Jackie, in being a community supporter for the shop and helping us to do one of our favorite things, which is bake bread. We've found that that way of having a group of people to see weekly coming for bread has been a real gift to us this year.
Well, thank you, Dan. And I'll give a brief testimonial because the bread is part of the bakery CSA, which goes along with the farm CSA. And it's certainly been a gift to me. It's a great treat to go in every Wednesday and not know what we're going to come out with, but it's all delicious and it's a wonderful idea. Just a note, if you have a question for Dan, you can submit it through the Q&A. And Dan, I'd like to start out with a question of my own. Can you explain a little bit the difference between a general benefit corporation and a nonprofit, and why you chose to go the benefit corporation route?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have worked for churches over the course of my life, and I've worked for a couple nonprofit organizations, and certainly think of myself in a lot of ways as that kind of model. And yet, kind of starting the business as a sole proprietor business, it was easier to create a mission-oriented business by moving into what they call a social benefit corporation. It is indeed still a for-profit business, but the goal of a social benefit corporation is that those profits are meant to be used for a community benefit. So the investment goes back into the community. And for me, that became a model of what many entrepreneurs are about, which is it's important as a business to make money, and yet to know that there's ways to do that in a way that really recognize the full benefits of a community. not think of it as I'm raising money for myself. And indeed, one of the amazing stories that we have is when we changed from a pricing model that took away the tipping model in a restaurant. We've gone to no tips, and as a restaurant, that's kind of a strange thing for many people. The early commentary in critique was that we had eliminated the tips so that all of those kind of extra money could come to me instead of my staff. Me as the owner, the greedy owner. And for anyone who knew me, and especially for my staff, we knew that that was entirely not the way it was working. We had changed that model so that we could create a way for my staff who worked a lot of different kinds of shifts, from very busy times on the weekends to very quiet evenings, to give every staff member a way to have an equitable wage, so that we could share our resources among our staff in a way that even if you didn't work a busy day and were collecting lots of tips, you could still be paid equitably. And that model of seeing staff as all jobs are important, all jobs are valuable, became a way of thinking about what our mission was about too.
And another question, you said that some of your mentees through the years stayed with the business, at least for a short time with you.
Yeah.
And wondered if you have any information, if they ever report back to you about whether others went on to careers in the food business.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. I think we have kind of thought of ourselves, especially with Nicollet Square, that many of the young folks who came to us for their 3-month kind of work time with us had either no experience in a restaurant or little interest in working in a restaurant, but this was an easy workspace because the commute was right down the stairs. So many of them chose to come and work with us because it was just so much easier than going anywhere else. But we have had many of the interns who really weren't really planning on working in a restaurant or a coffee shop. That was just not their plan, but it was a good 3 months to spend with us and build some work skills. Having said that, though, we've had many staff members who have indeed found that working in the restaurant with us and working in a space where they felt like, wow, this is actually a healthy place for me. I feel good here, to go on and look for other restaurants to work in. And some of the challenge of that is that unfortunately, many restaurants don't have that kind of healthy atmosphere for workers. We've been really working as advocates to build spaces like that around the city and around the country to have healthier restaurant workspaces. But I have one of my very first interns who did work with us for several years after as a staff member in our kitchen. Finally, we think of it as graduating, leaving the Nicollet Square, leaving us to live in his own apartment and to work in a hotel kitchen, and to find himself in a space where his skills were very, very well appreciated. I have a couple of staff interns who have moved on to work in other coffee shops who have said, it's like they may not have decided to do that until having worked with us, and now found that those skills were very useful for them to be able to move on and move into other spaces. We think of ourselves as, in the sense of being mentors and community members, that one of the gifts of Nicollet Square is that even when they finish with their internship, they may live in Nicollet Square for a while. And so they'll still be our neighbors, which has been a blessing to just continue to get to know them and see them move on into other spaces too.
That's wonderful. Have a question. Food businesses and service businesses have a reputation for craziness and burnout. How have you managed to keep your sanity and have a family life during these challenging times?
Yes, as I was mentioning, the restaurant industry is not designed to, or especially kind of has the image of being a pretty difficult workspace. And when we moved into Nicollet Square, we knew there were things that we had already worked pretty hard in the first years to create a team space, a family feeling space. I mean, most of my family was working with me anyway. So it was pretty easy to just kind of include other staff members as family, wanting to treat them like I was treating my family. But the industry itself is unfortunately built around a lot of high pressure, high stakes. And so kind of, I think what you might have picked up in some of the presentation is for the ingredients for us. Being a community space means we are really connected to customers in a way that a lot of restaurants never do. The doors are closed. You don't see your customers. You don't get to know them. You may not, customers may never see anyone in the kitchen. And so having a very open kitchen space where we are connected to customers all the time and you see who's coming in and out and form relationships, takes some of recognizes that there's more to the cooking. We're cooking for someone, not just cooking a meal for a plate. And that changes the way you think about what you're making. When you think about who the person is who will be eating this next, not just I would need to get this in the plate. And I'll say that's one of the most difficult things about the pandemic has been that we haven't had as much customer contact. We just are putting things in boxes, and it's harder to think about the person when you don't see them until they just kind of come in and grab the bag and go. But for those folks who, and I think we can say there's been a long history of customers, a lot of loyal neighbors, is when we get names of we know who we're making it for. I've seen my cook writing notes on the bag, making little pictures, finding ways to stay connected to the customers who we will see. Balance for me has always been about knowing that the restaurant itself is my home in lots of ways, and yet home for me is also the earth and its garden, its beautiful space. And so having having a lot of outdoor space for the restaurant has been really important for me to just be able to step outside. We grow a lot of things on the boulevard. And there's just a real touch point of, at some point in the day, getting outside to find an herb out on the sidewalk to get outside that way. I use that a lot and I have kind of trained our staff as well to say, it's okay to go outside, take a walk, get out for a little bit, go visit the garden, see what's growing, find a butterfly if we can. Those make a lot of difference for us. And probably the most important for me as an owner, and I learned this as a teacher first, was that I was never too busy for a story. And for anyone who has been a teacher, everyone knows you are always busy. There's always something going on. There's always too many things to do. And my staff have, that sense of me too, is that there's always too much to do. Dan's always too busy. But the starting point for every staff member when they get to know me is, I'm never too busy for a story. I'm never too busy to sit down and listen. And so those little gifts of taking a moment with each other to share a story have helped me stay balanced, help them stay balanced. And I know my customers have learned that as well, so that when they come in, they pull me away and offer a story, ask me to take a break. And I take those breaks with them, because that's how I stay grounded. That's how I stay connected. That's my balancing point. And again, with the pandemic, I've felt a little more out of balance, because we just haven't had those same kinds of connections. I miss them a lot. Look forward to having them back.
I'm sure your customers do too.
Yeah.
Another question about the General Benefit Corporation. Is that a new concept, or did you have models to learn from?
It's a fairly new concept, and for Minnesota, a B corporation was written into kind of state statute just a few years ago. So it's pretty new as a kind of organizational structure. There are indeed there's actually a really wonderful, lovely group of businesses in the Twin Cities area, the Social Enterprise Network that includes all industries, really. And, from folks who are much more of a, kind of mission-based space, to folks for whom, just recognizing that you can do your work and give your profits away, are all great models for how to think about yourself as providing a different kind of benefit than a for-profit business. We are indeed in what Minnesota would call a social benefit corporation. There are also specific benefit corporations who have a very, specific thing they work toward. We see ourselves more generally as a business that can generally support its community and find lots of ways to do that. And in some, there are indeed some ways to become a certified B corporation, which there are several in the city, in this state, that are great models for me of how to just be a really good business. And I look at them and think of them as my mentors, including my own bank, which I think is just kind of a cool thing too.
Great. Another question, are all the interns from Nicollet Square, or do some come from other venues?
Up until this year, we were only accepting the residents of Nicollet Square as our interns. And this summer, we joined with the folks from Wildflyer, who have an internship program for themselves, to share interns with them as well. That conversation with the folks at Nicollet Square, YouthLink, and Beacon helped us to recognize that, especially because the capacity at Nicollet Square to provide interns for us was more difficult for them, was that it was okay to offer more opportunities for others to join us as in an internship program. So we've kind of expanded that ability finally. The folks from Wildflyer are indeed looking at us as well as a way to say, let's kind of think of other folks who we could connect to and collaborate with. There was a small coffee shop on the east or west side of St. Paul who had a very similar model, who closed due to the pandemic. And I think we've kind of recognized that we may need to figure out ways to help expand the model to offer more opportunities for kids whose opportunities might not be around anymore. So we're kind of thinking about other places who do that same kind of training, who could send us someone to work with as well.
maybe building on that, what lessons, changes from the effects of pandemic restrictions do you think will carry forward post-pandemic?
Oh, I think especially the recognition that the restaurant models were never really very strong if you just think about yourselves as being on your own. And so the need to collaborate, to find community members, to build community support networks, is going to be something that a lot of restaurants have had to kind of reach out for, and I certainly hope will not let go of. It's been part of our model all the time, so we knew that it was useful to have neighborhood organization connections and church connections and school connections. I think there are a lot of other restaurants who are going to find that those are really important to having a long, sustainable life as a restaurant, which means, being available to cook for a community meal, to send, your staff off to an event at a park so that you can, help feed people. I think those things are going to stay, and I do look forward to helping build structures and networks to let them kind of grow that way too.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry that we're out of time, but I want to thank you ever so much, Dan, for being with us and inspiring us with your model and your contributions to the community. I also want to thank Cody, our tech administrator, who has been facilitating not only our Sunday forums, but dozens and dozens of other meetings as we have gone through this busy month.